Good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's program, our virtual discussion on Jérôme Salle's film, The Odyssey, about the life, career, and environmental activism of Jacques-Yves Cousteau. So, as I think a number of you who have joined us with this series as we have gone on this year know that our theme for this year is a delicate balance, global communities and the natural environment. And I want to thank you for tuning in. We actually have a nice size audience tonight, and I'm really looking forward to the discussion that we will have on this film. I should begin by noting that at the time that the United States and the Soviet Union were competing with one another to conquer space, Jacques-Yves Cousteau, as Salle's film shows us, was a pioneer in exploring the seas. And yet he was a lot more than that. So in this biopic that covers Cousteau's life and work from 1949 to 1979, we see him as a larger than life figure, as an ex-naval officer, an explorer, an inventor of the aqua lung and many other devices, as a scientist, a filmmaker, TV star and celebrity, businessman, and ultimately environmental activist, devoted to the protection of the seas and marine life. His underwater documentary, The Silent World, which he made in 1956, was actually the first documentary film to be awarded the top prize at the Cannes Film Festival. And that feat was not replicated again until Cannes awarded the top honors in 2004 to Michael Moore's documentary film, Fahrenheit 9/11. Perhaps even more notably about Cousteau, as I think some of us who are a little bit older in the audience will well remember, from 1966 to 1976, he ran a television series, The Undersea World of Jacques Cousteau, which was followed by a second series, The Cousteau Odyssey, that played in 1977. So he was really significant in bringing the dazzling images and the incisive commentary about the oceans and marine life to a worldwide audience. And yet, as Jérôme Salle, the director of tonight's film, points out, many of the under 30 generation, even in France today, have virtually no knowledge of Cousteau, the Calypso, or of his work and his celebrity. I actually asked my own class how many of them knew of Cousteau. One hand went up. That student is somewhat older, but it kind of bore out what the director was saying. Indeed, for many people today, the image of Cousteau, the Calypso, the crew with its red beanies is provided in Wes Anderson's film, The Life Aquatic of Steve Zissou, with Bill Murray in the role of the Cousteau-like figure. But The Odyssey, this film, which was the fifth film that Jérôme Salle has done, really represents his best work so far as a director. And that's saying something because he came to the process of directing films by a very unusual method. He did not go to film school. In fact, he dropped out of all school at the age of 16 in order to travel the world. He went on to become a press photographer and art director in London and Germany. But at the age of 30, which was about maybe 15 years ago for him, he decided he wanted to come back to his first love, his dream, which was always directing films. So he began to make films. He was pretty well received in the cinema community. He was not Orson Welles, but he had some initial success. And for years, he wanted to make a film about Cousteau because he had grown up in southern France. He sailed with his parents to the islands in the Var region where Cousteau did his first underwater discoveries in the late 1940s and early 1950s. He also was very much affected by watching the Cousteau documentaries in the 1960s and 1970s. And so in 2012, he began to work on a script for a film about Cousteau with the French screenwriter Laurent Turner. So Salle was also a screenwriter, so they began to put together a script. They pulled it from reading two books, one of them, Capitaine de La Calypso by Albert Falco and Yves Paccalet, and the second book was My Father the Captain by Cousteau's son, Jean-Michel. So they began to work on this script, and we're going to talk about the film quite a bit, and also even more about Cousteau's work, inventions, and legacies, and his contributions to environmental work. But here, let me just offer a couple of additional thoughts about the structure of the film and how it was critically reviewed. As a subject for a biopic, Salle admitted once the film was done that Cousteau was, quote, quite a complex character and quite secretive, unquote. He said it was not easy making the film, partly because it would involve a lot of underwater work, which meant it was hard to get the financing, given the expense and the risks of doing so much underwater cinematography. But also, as Salle admitted, he had a really difficult time trying to give shape to the film. There was just so much about Cousteau's life, so many pathways. He didn't know quite how to do it. And a number of reviewers have actually said that the film that he did direct is actually perhaps too stuffed with aspects in order to be handled in a feature film. So we can discuss whether that is a meritorious view. Critics will have their views. But the very interesting thing that I thought I would mention is that Salle ended up deciding on the narrative arc of the film when he was doing the casting. And he had long wanted to work with this rising French star, Pierre Niney. He had seen Niney's, some of his other work, and he thought he would be great in this film, playing the part of Cousteau's son, Philippe. So he brought in Niney to read for the part, and he was blown away by Niney's readings, and he decided, based on that, that he would use as his narrative arc the relationship between the father and son, that this would be the driving force in the film. And luckily, Pierre Niney lined up very well with the actor playing Jacques-Yves Cousteau, Lambert Wilson, who had the gravitas to really represent Cousteau in all of his facets. And if you've seen the film, you also know the very popular French actress, Audrey Tautou, plays Simone, Cousteau's first wife. And although critics feel that she's not used enough in the film, and as I said, we can talk about that as a matter of taste. But the other advantage, I think, that Salle realized by focusing on the father-son relationship is that Philippe is really about the only character in the film who represents a force of conflict with Jacques-Yves Cousteau. And as Salle acknowledged, he did not want to make a hagiographic film about Cousteau. He wanted to flesh him out. And he was able, by relying on this narrative arc and the character of Philippe, to really begin the film with a jolting flash forward, with Philippe's crash into a Portuguese river in 1979. So he was able, through the casting and thinking about the story, he and Turner rewrote the story several times before the film was made in order to provide this arc to give the film a dramatic tense to it, as well as conveying some very important information about Cousteau and his life. Also, some critics have acknowledged that Salle's choice of the narrative arc proved to be very interesting because they argued Jacques and Philippe really represent, perhaps for us, for the audience, two very different perspectives of the ocean, with Jacques Cousteau representing the old world of exploration, conquest, and profit, and Philippe signifying the desire to conserve and protect the environment. And of course, Philippe is given really in this film a lot of credit for Jacques Cousteau moving in the direction of environmentalism. I'll be very interested to hear what our two lead consultants, discussants, have to say about the choice of that narrative arc for this film. So we're going to talk about the film tonight. We're going to talk about Cousteau a lot. We're going to talk about how our knowledge of climate change, global warming, or as Thomas Frieden likes to say, global weirding, an interesting concept to bring forth, how that has all affected our perception, our perspective of Cousteau and his legacy as a scientist, businessman, explorer, and conservationist. So we're going to, at this point, Stacy, play the trailer for the film, and then I'll introduce our two discussants, and into the virtual session we will go. Okay?
Okay, thanks, Tom. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Just a few housekeeping things before I play the trailer. We are recording this session this evening. If you have questions or comments and you unmute yourself to ask, you will be in the recording, and it goes on one of our YouTube channels. So just be mindful of that. If you do not wish to be on camera, you can ask your questions or leave your comments in the chat and we'll read them out for you. So that's one thing. And the other thing is that we ask that you stay on mute until you have a question so that we don't interrupt our panelists. So without further ado, here is the trailer.
Je la vois, c'est la maison là-bas.
Quand on est sous l'eau, on est dans l'apesanteur la plus totale. En dessous, eh bien, un bleu de plus en plus profond. Un monde entier à découvrir.
Qu'est-ce qu'on attend?
Calypso. Tu vas pas acheter ça? Ah bah c'est déjà fait.
Ce bateau, c'est notre rêve à tous les deux qu'on va réaliser.
Pourquoi tu restes pas ici travailler avec nous?
Les Américains partent à la conquête de l'espace, et bien nous partons à la conquête de la mer.
T'es prêt à faire n'importe quoi pour du fric, en fait?
De quoi tu parles?
Tu vas pouvoir raconter une belle histoire, bien bidon, bien mégalo comme thème, hein. Le commandant Cousteau et son équipage se lient d'amitié avec des animaux sauvages, mais c'est super, c'est génial, bravo. C'est les clarisses.
Je me souviens de la sensation la première fois que j'ai mis la tête sous l'eau. L'immensité, la pureté.
Toutes ces années, quand je te regardais avancer comme ça, sûr de toi, bah je t'admirais. Parce que je t'ai tellement admiré, papa.
Je t'aimerai toujours.
T'es un bon parleur, Jacques.
Il y a plus de 30 ans, j'ai découvert un nouveau monde. J'ai voulu le conquérir. Alors qu'en fait, il fallait le protéger.
Mais il est encore temps.
Thank you, Stacy. Really a beautiful film in the cinematography. And I'll just note before I say a few words about our two discussants, I'm so sorry that the pandemic interfered and we were not able to show that film on the big screen. But the wonder of doing these sessions virtually is we have an audience from all over the United States. And so it's great to see you. And I'm really excited because tonight we have two specialist scholars from the Urban Coast Institute joining us to lead us in this virtual discussion. So it's my great pleasure to introduce them. I'll first introduce, as I think many of us know, Mr. Tony Macdonald, JD, who is the founding director of Monmouth University's Urban Coast Institute, going back to 2005. Tony has had a long career coordinating public policy, providing influence, informing lawmakers and the business community about the importance of the oceans. From 1998 to 2005, before he came to Monmouth, he served as the executive director of the Coastal States Organization, which includes 35 states and territories of the United States that have coastline. And over the years, he has provided much valuable information, has brought in important grants, opportunities for students at Monmouth University. Some of you may know that just last week, Tony was part of a panel that focused on governance of marine shipping and maritime sovereignty in this period of climate change. So Tony will lead us off, and then he will be followed by our distinguished colleague, Dr. Jason Adolf, who is the Endowed Associate Professor of Marine Science at Monmouth University and a member of the Urban Coastal Institute. Jason has not been with us quite as long, but is a welcome new addition. He came in 2017 from the University of Hawaii. Have you ever wondered about that choice you made coming to this wonderful climate? No, so we are really glad to have you. But Jason is really going to be, I think, interesting tonight for us because he's a specialist on phytoplankton ecology and physiology, and particularly has focused on harmful algal blooms and water quality monitoring on the coast. And just as Tony, I'm sure, is well known to governors, including New Jersey's own Phil Murphy, so too is Dr. Adolf, who is the head of the governor's harmful algal blooms. Is it a commission or task force or study group, what have you? But I guess you are the governor's man in terms of first point of contact in New Jersey. So we're really fortunate to have both of you. And Tony, I'll turn it over to you to get us underway.
Thank you very much, Tom. And it's great to sort of see everybody, or at least to see your names. And hopefully some of you will come out of the shadows and ask a question or participate in the conversation. So look forward to that. And it's really good to be here. I'm going to say from the outset that contrary to Tom's generous introduction, I'm not a scholar. And I am, however, somebody who thinks scholarly and thinks actively about a lot of things. And I really am taking an approach which is slightly different than my professorial colleagues. It's going to be a little bit more discursive. And I'm going to take this in the spirit of the pandemic, like I've been out to the movies with some friends and we're talking about it after seeing the movie and we're sharing our personal experiences. And I'm going to tell you that I was really pleasantly surprised at how much this film really connected with me personally, but also what we do professionally at the Urban Coast Institute. And you'll hear during some of my comments, because I was much more excited about this than I thought, but that really UCI has some personal connections with the Cousteaus. So this is not something that is a distant historical story. This is something that actually plays into the history of the UCI and continues to play a role in what we do. But before I get into that, I actually want to bring slightly a different perspective. And I'm going to bring a word that occurred to me, or that I connected from the film, that connects to something else that's going on in our lives right now. And that's perseverance. And I feel like that's a significant theme through the film in a very important way. And for those who have been paying attention to the news, the Perseverance is the name of the rover that just was sent up to Mars and landed the other days. And if anybody on this, talking about films, has not seen the film of the landing of the Perseverance on Mars, you have to see it. It is absolutely mind-blowing and inspiring and fantastic. And it's only a minute or something, but it is one of the most extraordinary things you will ever see. But the reason I raise that is a substantive one, not only because I think throughout this film, there is a wonderful juxtaposition of the discovery of the ocean with the discovery of outer space and looking at the stars and hopefulness and whatever. I also have a very practical thing to say, that I am a little bit distressed by how little has changed since, of course, the science has advanced. But in terms of what we know about the bottom of the ocean, how committed we are as a society to understanding the ocean and showing the ocean, it is astounding to me how little has changed. And I'm just going to share one fact with you, which, like all facts, may or may not be accurate, but I'm going to select them and choose them because I want to make a point. No, they are accurate. I'm kidding. But Perseverance went to the moon, to Mars, not the moon, Mars. It just blows my mind to say that. How much did it cost? Do people know how much it cost to send that? $2.7 billion. I think that's a bargain. I think that's fantastic. I don't think that's too much money. And I don't think most Americans would think that's too much money. $2.7 billion. The annual budget for ocean exploration in the US is $45 million. $45 million. So I'm just saying, now that's a little bit, is the budget for ocean exploration in the framework. But in addition, of course, the Navy spends money on things, so a lot of other things. That's the Pacific Ocean exploration. There is more money going into it, but it is so significantly different that it just is astounding that we do not have more sensibility about that and commitment to that. So I'm going to actually ask Stacy to pull up a picture of our first connection with Jacques Cousteau. So, and that'll lead me to some of my other comments. So if you'll pull up the first picture, Stacy, back in 1970, what was the year, Tom? Do you recall? 77, I think. Can you pull up that picture? Okay, so those of you who are good can look at that, and there are two familiar faces in that, even though they are a little bit younger than they currently are in the last time you've seen them. But obviously, you can see the picture of Jacques Cousteau, the second from the left. And then over to your right is former Monmouth president and current UCI Ocean Policy Fellow, Admiral Gaffney. And so we have a very personal connection back to Jacques from his time in the Navy and from his work that he did for many, many years around ocean exploration and other activities. And very specifically, what you don't know is he has also served as the chair of the NOAA Ocean Exploration Advisory Committee. So he has actually issued some of the most, I would say, groundbreaking and challenging reports about what we should be doing as a nation on ocean conservation and ocean exploration. So Paul continues to be a fellow to the Urban Coast Institute. I don't think he could join us tonight, but he did share this picture, and that his wife, Linda, was also shared him on all of these journeys and all of these explorations. So a shout out to both of them. So I point that out because if you go that, something that we continue to think about at UCI and continues to be very much a motivator for what we do. And toward the end of this, you'll see a couple of pictures I'll share with you, because we had one of his sons, Jean-Michel Cousteau, as one of our ocean champions at Monmouth University. And I cannot say he could not have been a more generous and more welcoming guest. He shared with students, he took his time, he gave a wonderful presentation about that. And I gotta say, I don't think he really got as much play in this film as maybe he had. So he's the second son. So maybe this goes to Tom's comment about when you make a movie, maybe you have to simplify your narrative a little bit in order to make some overarching thematic points. But Jean-Michel certainly was not really an active factor in this film. And I'll come back to that a little bit later. But I'll actually maybe build on something that I noticed right away when the film started. It was the father being waken up by what he said. And he said he thought it was Philippe, but it was Jean-Michel. And I actually think that's somewhat telling, and actually something that could have been expanded more on in the film, that really thinking about what they each brought to the family, what they each brought to the future of ocean conservation, because many people who have followed this know that Jean-Michel has been somebody who has been active. Again, we'll come back to the family dynamics, which are really quite complicated. I don't want to get off on that right now, and they're way more complicated than the film suggested. But I want to talk about some of the things that I saw in the film that I also thought kind of more thematically play back to some of the things that we do at the Urban Coast Institute. I mentioned that we have a direct connection with the Cousteaus, but we also have a direct connection with ocean exploration, not only through the work that Admiral Gaffney has done directly as a member of the advisory committee, but if you look at our list of ocean champions, we have also had Sylvia Earle, who was really one of the first great explorers and continues to run an organization called Mission Blue. And Sylvia is an absolutely aspiring woman who is really the first one to do deep diving. She is the queen of the ocean, and she also has been a great continual point of contact, and she continues to inspire people about ocean exploration, particularly women. We had Kathy Sullivan, who was the head of NOAA, but was also both an astronaut and also an ocean explorer, and somebody who has really had some of the deepest dives that have ever been done by a woman. Again, another woman. That's fantastic. We had Wendy Schmidt, and Wendy Schmidt, again, if you pay attention, is the wife of Eric Schmidt, who was Google. And there's another trend that I'm going to talk about. So not only are we underexplored in terms of our own national commitments and investments in the ocean, there is a huge move toward private philanthropy giving big money. Some of you may have read about Jeff Bezos wanting to go to the moon and private philanthropists, but there's also a move toward private philanthropists looking into ocean exploration. And Wendy Schmidt, the Schmidt Ocean Foundation, have been some of the largest investors in ocean exploration. They have their own ocean research vessel. So they make significant commitments to that. So really we see the private sector, and in this case, the philanthropic sector, stepping up and fill that void. Another example that I'm going to make and talk about the vessel. The vessel is a wonderful story. I mean, the vessel is character in this movie. And it is a very important character in this movie. And I'm going to tell you, it's an important character in the Urban Coast Institute, but I'll come back to that in a minute. But the reality is that also there's other investors, James Cameron was taken with this and did one of the deepest dives ever. 7 of the 10 deepest dives ever done were done by a private gentleman who had to invest in his own submersible. The technology for submersibles, we're sending people to the moon, to Mars. And we still haven't been able to perfect how to get people down to the deepest parts of the ocean. It's just astounding to me. And Ray Dalio, who some of you in the business sector may know, is one of the wealthiest people in the country and a hedge fund investor, is also investing in the ocean. And just by comparison to the budget we talked about, he has just built a new ocean exploration vessel. The cost of building that vessel was $200 million. And the annual cost of operating that research vessel is $20 million. Remember what I told you? The national ocean exploration budget is $45 million. So we also have a lot of change happening. I will say that I don't mean to be negative about this. I'm just saying it just blows my mind at how much inspiration we get out of the ocean and how much all of us have grown and thrived on these beautiful films. And also the ocean exploration story. I mean, he really burgeoned an industry of natural films. And we actually showed the film another ocean champion, Jesse Ausable, who was the co-lead of the Census for Marine Life, was the funder through the Lounsburg Foundation of a film called The Oceans, another French film that was filmed in 2009, which is absolutely beautiful, spectacular film that we showed here at Monmouth as well. So we really are thinking about really where are we going with this? And I really think one of the stories of this film that we're told in a specific way that is the story of where ocean exploration now is the development of technology and thinking about this as an engineering and technology problem as much as a environmental problem. A great line there's a lot of funny lines, and it's like nobody ever died going to prep school, but I'm like, well, I think some of them did actually. They really wasn't happy. Doesn't sound like these kids were too happy. But there's a great line in here about we're not telling stories about the environment, we're telling stories about people. And I do think that is extremely relevant too, because I do think we need to connect the ocean to the people. And for some reason, they can do it in space exploration, but it's difficult to do in the ocean environment. So I was talking about the vessel, and I just want to tell kind of a parallel and much smaller story about a vessel like the Calypso, which was, again, an old repurposed, I can't remember what it was, old vessel that they painted and patched and got technology. But we're incredibly fortunate at Monmouth to actually have secured through a transfer from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration a 47-foot research vessel that also was I think was a formal buoy tender that we have repurposed. And thanks to a lot of great supporters that we have at the university, we've been able to upgrade that. We've been able to redo that. We've been able to upgrade the equipment, and it now supports really fantastic research by our students out in right off the Mid-Atlantic. So just you all imagine. I know we're not going to Antarctic yet, Jason, or we're not going to the Gulf of Aden, but we are really doing some fantastic work at Monmouth University using our repurposed research vessel that really is doing great and really some cutting edge work that Jason can expand on a little bit. I won't go into that. So I mentioned a little bit about the legacy, and I will just sort of mention without going into it that that's kind of the backstory. There was Jean-Michel and Philippe, there was the wife, and then there was a mistress that they didn't really go into very much. So there are now 6 children. And by the way, almost all of the children are now involved still in some way in ocean exploration and film. And so I do think that there is a legacy that's being carried on, not only through the Cousteau Society, which is being run by his second wife and mistress, by the Ocean Future Society, which is being run by the Jacques Cousteau's family, and then by the independent efforts of the grandchildren who are continuing on. Most of them, 4 out of 6 of them, are continuing to work in this area and do some fantastic work. So that legacy is a little complicated from an interpersonal way, but let's just give it credit for the fact that it really has inspired not only millions of other people, but also the next generation continue to be involved in this. So I'm kind of looking through my notes here. I want to make sure that I have reserved time for Jason to discuss this. But I guess I just want to just also be a little bit like of a film critic. And there's a lot of things I enjoyed about this film, but I felt it was 3 different films. And the first 40 minutes was, to me, really wonderful. It established the tactile connection. You watch them put their hand in the ocean. You watch them dive in the ocean, the immersive experience of the ocean, the whole inspiration of what it was, what led him to leave the Navy and his career and become an oceanographer. I felt that was, to me, the most successful part of the film. And to me, it was also the one that struck the most current note, to me, the deepest note around that. So I do think that was interesting. And I do think also there was a wonderful storyline, just the juxtaposing he was also, don't forget, an aviator, even though he's a member of the Navy. And I think it was a great storyline. I think they did successfully build on that connection, that leading to, there's a lot of foretelling what was going on here a little bit with regard to the aviation storyline. So there was lots of moments that suggested that something was coming up, that you should pay attention to that storyline. So I thought that was interesting. The second third of the film was a little bit more, and I thought it moved through quickly, but it was a little bit more like the incredible inspiration in the films and the Academy Awards. So it became a little bit like a documentary where it was going through, and then this happened, and then that happened, and that happened. And that was great. And then they pivoted back for the last third to, as Tom suggested, trying to resolve some of the interpersonal issues and also make what seemed to me an overly gentle landing to everybody getting behind the environmental mission that was underlying all of this. But again, I enjoyed it thoroughly. I thought it was a really interesting experience for me. I do think that, again, I am telling you, we are continuing to involve the issues that they set out there. I think the storytelling is extremely important about this. I do think the line about we're telling stories about people is something that I would like to leave this movie with. And remember that even though it seems dark sometimes, even it seems far away sometimes, even though it seems silent sometimes, or we can't hear it and see it, I do think it's something that we need to step up to so that we can see that. One other last story, Tom, I'm sorry if I'm going on too long, but we had another ocean champion, his name, Bob Ballard. Bob Ballard discovered the Titanic, so one of the greatest ocean exploration people in our history, okay? And he was, again, he was great. And he told fantastic stories. And we were sitting around after his presentation. And he said, I don't know why we're spending all this money to go to the moon. I think we should just be building places for to live. If we're overcrowded, why don't we build places for people to live right in the ocean? This doesn't make any sense to me. Why do we want to go to Mars or the moon? And so that came back to me when they held this great little sub story about his Jean-Michel when he first was going to architecture school, and he was thinking about ideas of building places in the ocean. Not a crazy idea, and we might come back to revisit that idea at some point in the future. Why are we trying to spend all the money to colonize the moon when maybe we might be colonizing the ocean in the future? So that was just a little side story. And this is from Bob Ballard, not me. And I thought that was a really interesting little connection that jogged my memory when I saw the film. So anyway, thank you, Tom, for inviting me today. Thank you for sharing the film with me and us. And I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. My pleasure. And I know, thank you for your comments. And I know that hopefully we'll have pretty good audience discussion after Jason makes his remarks and we open it up. And I think a lot of things, you made some really good points about the film. So I know I want to come back to some of those issues as well. So Dr. Adolf, Jason, if you would carry forth with your thoughts. I know I'm particularly interested in what you have to say about the state of the oceans and what this film tells you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you everybody for coming, and thank you, Tony, for those comments. Yeah, I would love to sit down with an engineer and ask, what's harder on mechanical, electrical systems, salt water and pressure, or the vacuum of space? I wouldn't be surprised if they would answer that salt water is worse to build in than the vacuum of space. I think that has something to do with why colonization is going off planet rather than down into the depths of the ocean. So I hadn't watched this movie before preparing for this, but I also really enjoyed it more than I expected to. And it kind of reminded me that I'm one of the guilty people who knew Jacques Cousteau growing up, but I hadn't really thought about Jacques Cousteau in a long time, and had kind of forgotten about him. Even though when I do think about it, he's really. I had his books in my room as a kid. I watched the shows, and what he did for me and for everybody was show us something we hadn't seen before. And that's really what my comments will focus around, is how important technology is for marine science in general, just to accomplish the simple task of seeing what's in front of you, what's there. And if you imagine going across the ocean on a boat, it looks like just a homogeneous blue wavy plain all around you. But we can't see into the water very well from above it, and light doesn't penetrate into the water very much at all either. And we're actually missing everything that's happening in the ocean. We can't see it. And I always bring this up as a contrast with my students between terrestrial ecology and marine ecology. I could stand on the edge of a field and see the grasses and the animals, the birds flying around, rabbits, foxes running around in the forest in the distance. You can see all the landscape in front of you. But if you stand on a boat and look at the ocean, you see nothing of what's going on of importance for that ecosystem. You see the surface of the water, maybe a few meters below, and that's it. And I think one of the things that Jacques Cousteau did in his career, between the invention of the aqualung and the bringing of cameras underwater, is just let people see what's there. And that kind of ignited a spark that millions of people caught on to. So from my background as a phytoplankton ecologist, as Tom said, I've done a lot of study of light in the ocean, and I know I'm not a photographer in the artistic sense, but I am a photographer in the technical sense. I take pictures under the microscope all the time, and I've both with photons and with electrons using an electron microscope. And so I think about light a lot, and that's what I wanted to focus on here a little bit today, about what it means to take pictures of stuff underwater, and how different an environment that the light environment is underwater compared to what we're used to. And then end up talking about the state of some marine ecosystems, focusing on corals, which are one of the more highly threatened marine ecosystems on the planet due to climate change. So I do have some slides to share. Oh, I can do that myself. Okay. So let's see here. My pointer on. So the first thing that everybody probably does understand, but I'm going to go into a little more detail about it, is the oceans are dark. And so this presents a problem for underwater photography, of course. By at most 200 meters in the ocean, what we call the euphotic zone, where there's actually enough light for photosynthesis to occur, ends. In most places in the ocean, that ends much sooner than that. Below that is the dysphotic zone, where there's enough light for visual predatory behavior in animals, but not enough light to drive photosynthesis. So big-eyed fishes can see each other and hunt each other using the few photons that are streaming through this section. But algae can't photosynthesize. Then there's the aphotic zone, where there's just no light. And animals there are adapted to, one, eating primary production of the food that drifts down from the surface lit layers, and two, living in a world of complete darkness. By volume, most of the ocean falls in this category here, aphotic to dysphotic, a very small portion. So this is at most 200 meters. The average depth of the ocean is 2,700 meters. So the illuminated part of the ocean is a thin sliver at the top. And the other thing with photography underwater is that not only does the amount of light decrease, but the colors of light go away. Water is what's called a spectral filter. It filters out specific wavelengths of light more than others. In particular, from the red end of the spectrum, is filtered out, absorbed by the water, and remade as heat. It's attenuated, it goes away. And the photons that make it down the deepest in the ocean to that 200-meter depth in the open ocean are blue. It's a little different in the coastal ocean, which is greener with chlorophyll, but let's focus on this here. So two things I've set the stage with. One, the ocean is dark. And two, the parts of the ocean that are illuminated aren't illuminated like the world that we live in. There's not a full rainbow of colors to reflect off things and show those colors of things. There's mostly just blue light. And if you've ever dove, or in the movie, you can see the footage, you can see the ocean is a vast blue. I think Jacques Cousteau said something about being underwater and just seeing the endless blue out in front of him. And that's because all the other wavelengths of sunlight have been absorbed by the water itself. What this results in, so if we go underwater with a camera with a spotlight that shines all the spectrum of light and shine it on a coral or a fish, we may see different colors like reds and blues and yellows. And to us, that looks like a very vibrant fish. But in their world, because there's no red photons at depth underwater, red essentially turns up as a dark color, as a black. So whereas we think of red in the terrestrial environment as a color that signals here I am, in fact, there's a lot of poisonous animals are colored red to show that they're poisonous. It's just the opposite in the marine environment. The color red turns up as black in the natural light environment of the underwater world. And I think most people are familiar with this adaptation to the darkness of the ocean, which is marine bioluminescence. We see this in microorganisms that can light up entire bays. The wave action kind of makes them emit light because of the mix of an enzyme and a substrate. And then in animals, animals will harbor little pockets of bioluminescent bacteria. And by chemical reaction in the cells of the bacteria, they emit light. So that's bioluminescence, and that's an adaptation to the darkness of the ocean. In the aphotic zone, animals use that to find each other, to find mates, and to lure prey to the front of their mouth, like the hatchetfish does with a little thing hanging over in front of its mouth. It'll lure fish in and then eat it. There's a great scene in Finding Nemo with that in it. But then what I want to talk more about is there's a scientist named David Gruber, and this is a paper of his down here, and he discovered something else in the marine environment relatively recently. This paper is from 2014, and there's an excellent TED Talk on this if you want to look it up. And this is, other than bioluminescence, which is a chemical reaction that produces light, this is biofluorescence. And fluorescence is a process where one wavelength of light is absorbed and then re-emitted as a longer wavelength of light. And you can see that most of these, what he discovered by taking a special kind of camera equipment underwater. So in this way, I find it to be very parallel to what Jacques Cousteau did. He went underwater with a new kind of camera, and he just showed us stuff that exists that no one would ever think to think exists before. And this type of camera detects, it blocks out the blue light in the environment and accentuates, if you will, the light coming off of the animals as they absorb the blue light underwater and re-emit it in these fluorescent greens and reds and yellows, all wavelengths that are longer than blue. So they're taking in blue wavelengths and fluorescing them as these greens, yellows, and reds. So people hadn't seen this before. And with your naked eye, you would never see this because our eyes have receptors for blue light. So all the ambient blue light would obfuscate the green light fluorescence coming off of these animals. But marine animals don't have, not all of them have the blue light receptors. So they can't see the ambient blue light. They see the fluorescent light coming off these animals. So this camera system is kind of mimicking the sensory abilities of the animals. And what the paper describes and what is shown here is that these aren't just random fluorescent. You know, you can put a lot of things under light and see fluorescence off them. These are patterns similar to markings that would identify a mate or a conspecific. These have a meaning. And this implies that marine organisms are living in a light environment totally alien and unknown to us humans that live above the surface of the water in a very, very different light environment. And like I said before, this kind of insight into the world underneath the waves that David Gruber pioneered is very reminiscent to me of what Jacques Cousteau did with just showing people what's under the waves. So one of the things in the movie that the way they set it up was that, and Tom, you mentioned this, that Cousteau started his career in the military, and his motivation was to explore and conquer, kind of the old guard, the old school. And he came around, in the way I saw the story being told, through pressure from his son, Philippe, to understand that his role really should be to explore and preserve. So the next thing I want to talk about is the importance of that and where the marine ecosystems are now. And there's all sorts of issues and problems facing different marine ecosystems that range from overfishing, not just reduction in the amount of fish in the ocean, but specific removal of top predator, apex predator fish, and how that affects ecosystems top to bottom, to pollution in the ocean, which has an acute effect on marine organisms at the coast and even out in distant places in the ocean far from land. Pollution that's found from the top to the bottom of the ocean that originally came from land. Microplastics in marine organisms in our food supply from the ocean. But what I want to highlight, because I think what Cousteau showed a lot of were coral reef images, because they're shallow and there's light at coral reefs, so it's easier to film. And coral reefs are one of the most threatened marine ecosystems under the threat of climate change. They're very sensitive to sea surface temperature, and an increase in the sea surface temperature is a key hallmark of climate change effects on the oceans. 90% of the excess heat, listen closely to this statistic if you haven't heard it before, 90% of the excess heat held at the Earth's surface since the start of industrialization has been absorbed by the ocean. So you can look at that two ways. Either one, if we didn't have the oceans we have on the planet, there'd be 90% more heat in the terrestrial environment where we live because of changes in atmospheric chemistry due to primarily burning fossil fuels. And two, you can look at it as the ocean is like our big friend that's kind of taking the bullet for us. But there are consequences. There are consequences to the fact that the ocean does this, and one of them is something called coral bleaching. A coral is an animal called a cnidarian, related to jellyfish, that harbors symbiotic algae in its tissues, and as it grows, it secretes these calcium carbonate skeletons that make a coral reef. Not all corals do that, but reef-building corals do. They've evolved for hundreds of millions of years under a temperature regime that we're now exceeding more and more often. And when that happens, the cnidarian animal, for some reason, kicks the symbiont out. And we call it coral bleaching because even if the live animal is still wrapped around this calcium carbonate skeleton, it's transparent. It's not an alga. It doesn't have any pigments. So we see right through it and we see this white bleached looking coral. Bleached coral aren't dead yet immediately. Bleaching does not mean death, but as it begins to happen for longer periods of time and more frequently, the probability of a coral reef dying because of bleaching increases. So I'm going to stop there and get into the group discussion, hopefully. And I really did enjoy the movie. There's a lot to talk about from the technical parts that weren't covered in the movie very much about taking video underwater to the Jacques Cousteau's switch from the conquer and explore to the more conservation angle of the oceans. And thank you very much, Tom, for having me. And I'm looking forward to a great discussion.
Thank you, Jason. Yes, thank you, Tony and Jason, for your good comments. And I think now we'll open it up for general discussion, for comments about the film, about Cousteau, about the technology, and both what Tony and Jason have provided us to think about. I was thinking as you were both speaking that the very fact of Cousteau's work is one reason we're even having these kinds of conversations, and hopefully, you know, there will be much more poured into ocean research because, you know, the figures that you quoted, Tony, are really unbalanced. And you know, if as Jason said, the ocean is our friend, we're really taking our friend for granted in our lifestyle today. So let's open it up.
I want to make one comment as people are gathering their thoughts, because I'm hoping for a lively discussion and people unmuting. But, you know, as listening to Jason's fantastic presentation, it also reminded me and occurred to me that the arc of Cousteau's life and the arc, the time frame for this, you know, we were not as aware when he started out of the impact that human beings were having on the ocean. So I think the nature of the discovery, and if you look at the arc of his framework between, you know, the 60s into the early 70s, we really didn't pass our major environmental laws until the early 70s, because we were not aware of the extent of impact we were having at that time. So, you know, although it's nice to romanticize it, they talked about him being a romantic based on his relationship with his son, which was, I don't know if it was true, but it was great to do that. But in reality, the whole world was waking up to the environmental significance of these things that when he started out might not have been as front of mind. It was only really in the 70s that we as a nation became aware of that. And then Jason's last point, that concern and significance is so much exacerbated about the impacts of both growing population along the coast and the change about the potential impacts, as well as the climate impacts of the change of temperature and ocean acidification. So that's kind of a whole thing that, again, has been out there for a while, but we've really just been able to understand the significance of that.
Okay, thank you. So let's open it up. So I don't know, Stacy, whether you've gotten any comments by chat, or, you know, the forum is open for any thoughts that you have about any of the things we've discussed. I hope a number of you have seen the film already, and if not, you will check it out. I was very gratified that both of our discussants liked the film, because when I first broached it with them, I was mentioning that not everybody among the critics was singing the praises. They liked the underwater part of it, but they said the film kind of flopped on land. I don't necessarily agree with that, but I think there's the whole narrative raises some very interesting points for reflection as well. So anyway, who would like to jump forward with us? Jump into the pool, if you will. Bill, Dr. Mitchell.
I have a comment. I love the film, right? And was kind of flawed by the underwater photography, which I found incredibly dramatic. And of course, the dramatic arc of the film changes at the point that Philippe watches the garbage being thrown into the water from the Calypso. That's when the dramatic arc changes. Oh my goodness, it's a kind of, you know, I've had this great insight all of a sudden, right?
Epiphany,
It did not quite happen that way. But I wanted to just, you know, take off with Tony's comment about you know, how much we spend to go to Mars and how much we're spending on ocean research. Now, the problem here is that we don't quite depend on Mars the way we depend upon the oceans. Right? The oceans are really fundamental to life on the land and to us. So the imbalance in those resources is incredible. But I enjoyed the film and your remarks of both Tony and Jason. Thanks.
We have a question in the chat.
Okay.
From Jen. How can teachers and students further advocate for ocean exploration and conservation? The ocean houses food, supplements, and leisure, yet we focus on planets that offer none of that yet.
Tony, unmute yourself.
I'll start, but I think Jason, you know, again, I would say, again, teachers and students. So obviously Jason's doing that day to day for students at the college level. But I would also mention that something that we're doing at Monmouth, which I think is also reaching more people, is thinking more about citizen science and engaging people directly in science. So everybody can go out and take a water sample and test themselves. I mean, the technology is advancing. Jason and his colleagues are doing some phenomenal work on environmental DNA, where you can take a vial of water and he can explain it to you, and you can actually now sequence the DNA what has been exposed, what has been present in that water. So it's just, there are great opportunities, and we're doing some projects with communities around the coastal lakes. So I do think there's something about starting local to inspire people about exploration more broadly. So I do think thinking about it in those terms is one suggestion that I would have. I would like to point out a little bit of it. To me, it's the contradiction that's difficult for me to wrap my brain around, that Bill sort of alluded to and is in your question as well. Despite the benefits we get from the ocean, drug discovery, travel and leisure, fish, frameworks, despite the direct benefits we get, we still can't motivate people to invest in understanding it more and doing the research. So in a way, it's very interesting. Maybe we're more interested in things we don't know than in things that are seem a little bit more complicated. And maybe the ocean just seems like a complicated place where Mars is so unknowable or so unknown that it's just all pure discovery. So I don't know. It's just something I struggle with, because as a community, we have been trying to make the case that you all are making a little bit, that Bill's and your comments make. So my thought is to start local and then think big about the inspirational stuff, and then hopefully they'll be inspired to find out what their role is in that.
I would say to that question about what can students and teachers do, and the contrast between ocean exploration and space exploration, and I'm a big fan of both, to tell the truth. But we need the ocean now for this planet. We may need extraterrestrial planets in the future to colonize, and that's a real reality that's out there and further off than the immediacy with which we need the ocean. I think Jen, you said in your comments, it's a major source of food, and that varies by country and region, how dependent a region is on foods. It's a major source of transportation. Those are economic arguments, but the climate of the planet, and this is something that's been more and more understood in the last, I'd say, 3 decades, that how much the climate of the planet is dependent on the conditions of the oceans, and how much ocean atmosphere interaction there is, and how that affects the climate where we live, not just in the ocean. And further, how what's happening in the southern equatorial Pacific Ocean, for instance, can affect the climate and the weather patterns from Northwest Territories of US and Canada down to the Southeast United States. And I'm referring to the ENSO El Nino Southern Oscillation connection between the ocean's climate and weather.
Yeah, I have one other comment too, which really comes from an experience. I'm fortunate to recently be appointed as a member of the US National Committee for the UN Decade for Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, which starts this year. And a big focus of that effort is giving voice to youth. I think there's a little bit of a kind of a, if you look at the influence of youth in the climate movement, and there's many youth activist groups and frameworks. So allowing us sometimes, I'm sorry, in the academic arena, they can, prefer the voice of the expert. But we need to think of experts, I think, with all due credit to Jason and Thomas, others, but I think we need to think about experts a little bit more broadly. And I think youth and giving a voice to youth and say, you have something to say, what do you think, is something we need to be very intentional about. And I also would like to call out the commitment to a diverse, equity, and kind of inclusive framework, to recognize that the nature of those voices need to reflect the different activities and interests of people. And we need to be very intentional about bringing those voices to the table. And I think that then inspires a much broader cross-section of people. So again, I think we need to turn on its head the fact that youth need an opportunity. We just need to give them that opportunity. And I think they will find it. I am just always amazed at the university when we give a project to a student and then we put them up and say, tell us what you've learned. And we do the learning, because they really have, they do step up in ways that are really pretty remarkable. I'm sure, Bill, you saw many examples of your career where your students have taught you incredible things over the time. So just a shout out for more inclusive outreach, and also literally just providing those opportunities. And I think we'll be surprised by what we hear.
Yeah, Tony, no offense taken. My job, in fact, is to generate young people to take my job.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy to do that. And you mentioned citizen scientists before, and that the reason that we scientists enlist citizen scientists, which are not trained scientists, but people who do the science with us, especially in any kind of environmental science, is because they know more about the place where they live. The citizen scientists are usually people, in our case, with these coastal lakes we work in, they live around the coastal lakes. They know the ins and outs. They walk it every day. They observe it every day. I read about it, and I understand the chemistry of it and the microbiology of it. That's one thing. That's one voice. But the voice of somebody who has a different relationship with that environment is equally important to the overall knowing of that environment. So I agree with you completely on that.
So do I, Tony. I think that's an excellent comment. If we're learning anything these days, it's we have to really kind of emerge from our own tunnel vision on things and see the broader implications. I want to ask if we can kind of come back to Cousteau, his environmental activism, because the film frames that journey in one way. And you made the very interesting comment, Tony, that you think Jean-Michel does not receive the credit he should get in terms of his contributions to the work of the Cousteau Foundation. In fact, when I watched the film, I thought of Jean-Michel like, the older brother in the prodigal son metaphor. Philippe is the prodigal son who comes back and then is welcomed by his father, and of course pushes his father, according to the film, to really begin to see the world in a different way. But Jean-Michel is the one who's always there and trying to help his father. So I'm wondering if you want to share some additional insight on that. And then I wanted to tell just a couple of points about the title of the film, which, again, a number of critics found not fully satisfying, because they said, had this film been called The Oedipal Complex, that would have made more sense. But the Odyssey, with all of the visions of Homeric action, was something that just did not make so much sense. But I did hear from the French actor Lambert Wilson what I thought was a really good explanation as to why that title made sense. But let's talk a little bit about Jean-Michel, if you want to be able to share some more.
I will only say that, again, I think in the U.S., he's had a much more huge U.S. presence. So I think that's certainly something that we realize that his group, the conservation group, has been more focused on that. Again, I do not know enough or would be comfortable speculating on the very intense family dynamic, but there was actually litigation involved, and who has access to the Calypso and who has the access to framework. And I don't know enough about it to make any comments about that. But I would say that, Jean-Michel does have a legacy of certainly of environmental activism and commitment. Two quick thoughts. First of all, obviously the Odyssey builds pretty directly off of the name of the boat, the Calypso. So that story is obviously pretty literal. So it seems to me to be obvious, if not necessarily descriptive, of the framework of the film. But I can get how they got there so quickly from that story, and you can tell that story better than I, Tom. But hopefully other folks know it. So I do think that's an aspect. But I guess I also want to kind of make some comment is for the purposes of the dramatic arc of the film, the bad capitalism versus the good environmentalism was a very simple dichotomy, and it was even to the point of anti-Americanisms in there a little bit. So, Disney and, so, but I will tell you, that's a French-American thing, just like the Oedipal thing is something that, frankly, every French film sort of, you're like, oh, there we go, Freud again. But so that seems to be a fairly consistent thing from my not learned experience, but from my kind of nominal experience in thinking about these things. But I do think that is just a dichotomy that was a little bit more dramatic in the film than it is in real life. And some of the family conflicts were about commercialization of the name and use of the name and other frameworks. But I said the private sector, it has been a big supporter of things. The defense sector has been a big supporter of ocean exploration and research. So, the dichotomy isn't quite that simple. And there's nothing in my mind, particularly now, given the challenges we face, that it's an all hands on deck, if you'll excuse that kind of metaphor in this particular context. But to me, I do think that Jean-Michel has a foundation that has consistently supported ocean things. He's made films of his own, incredibly successful. So there is this other connection, and I think this is something I love Jason's kind of scientific explanation about. If we can't see it, it's hard for us to really value it. And so I do think that was very much a strong message of the film, telling stories and seeing things, which I think is still very much true. I still think that challenge continues to be, and if anything, all the pretty pictures don't really tell the story that Jason was telling about the deep, dark mysteries and the unseen things and the phenomenal life that's being discovered down there, and our assumptions about them being lifeless areas are changing. And I do know that the Cousteau grandchildren, both Jean-Michel and Philippe's, both have their own foundations and are also filmmakers and activists in their own right. And so I think that legacy continues. And I'm sort of surprised that nobody in your class have heard them. Maybe I am dating myself and you all, that I still think that they have, in the ocean community, they're certainly well known. In the circles that I travel in, they're certainly extremely well known, and they're now pretty well kind of, I think, networked across these environments. So there's an interesting little side story about the Cousteau Center in Monaco, and how that actually was developed in Monaco in a way that maybe wasn't the most environmentally successful. But I also will mention Prince Philip of Monaco is probably one of the largest single supporters of ocean conservation in the world, and an incredibly big supporter of that. So I think there's a lot of direct lines to the current ocean conservation movement that can be drawn back to Jacques Cousteau. So and they're still very much alive.
Thank you, Tony, because I think that's important to realize, because a film does take some liberties, and we don't know exactly all of that, but I think that helped out. I do see somebody that I want to recognize who has joined us in the audience, because he sent us some photos earlier tonight, but even more important, he was the moving spirit to the Urban Coast Institute, and in his own way to what became the World Cinema Series, which was born as the Provost Film Series out of the Two River Film Festival. You'll remember all of that history, Admiral Gaffney. So there were certainly some ups and downs with that. So thank you for coming on board and joining us tonight. So good to see you.
Nice to be seen, Tom. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. I'm glad you invited me. I got the schedule a little bit backwards, so I've had a busy day here. Been a sunny day and 75 degrees.
Okay. Well,
and everyone is in place, so we're great.
I think we'll cut you off after hearing about your balmy weather. Although we hit 50 some odd degrees today, so it was a real breakthrough day for us. So maybe spring will eventually come. Anyway, we've had actually, I think, a pretty good discussion of the film. Have you seen the film?
I
Odyssey?
did.
You did?
Linda and I saw it a couple of years ago.
Uh-huh.
And as you know, one of the high spots in our ocean career, Linda and mine, is meeting Jacques Cousteau on Capitol Hill at lunch. That was in about 1977.
Yeah, yeah,
And you can see Linda's long hair, and I have hair.
yeah.
It's a great photo for us.
Yeah, it was a really good photo. So didn't have to touch that one up too much. So anyway, no, it was really good. And I mean, when we first were setting this up, I mentioned to Tony that you know, I wanted to bring this film into the series because we were looking at really the whole issue of the delicate balance of global communities and the natural environment. We had lots of really good films, terrestrial films, but here was the ocean, so much of the world's surface, and such an important thing. And I right away thought, you know, we had the Urban Coast Institute, and I remember Jean-Michel came to one of those first sessions of the Urban Coast Institute. So that was really glorious to think about those years and that history, and the fact that we have actually a special connection to the Cousteau legacy, which made this film really a very good fit for the series this year. So anyway.
Well, I'm glad you're doing it, Tom. I mean, Jacques Cousteau and his son have been great spokesmen, and they mobilized. When I was a young person, long before you were a young person, if you went out and bought a mask and a snorkel, you could be an oceanographer. It's gotten much more sophisticated then, but you know, he was a spokesman, and Tony Macdonald will tell you that one of the things that he has been working on with some of the leaders in national ocean science and ocean policy is trying to get one of the leaders of the new administration to mention the word ocean, like a cabinet member, like the new Secretary of Commerce, for example,
right,
or maybe the new Secretary of Defense even, because it's a big deal if you believe in climate. And we know that every day in America, thousands of people move to a coastal county. So we're all jamming up against the coast. There's going to be wind energy off New Jersey someday. That will set up a debate between people that don't like it, that do like it, or do like it but don't want to disturb the ocean. There'll be all kinds of policy debates, and you'll be at the forefront because you have exactly the best location. If wind energy works offshore, the best location is off the coast of New Jersey for lots of population and geography reasons. And so we're trying to get, I of course work for Tony Macdonald now. He is trying to mobilize people around the country, literally around from coast to coast and north to south, to get these new leaders to speak out, because half of America is submerged.
Right.
3 billion acres is submerged, and a little less than 3 billion acres are above high tide in America. It's a big part of our country, and it's important for people to speak out about this right now.
No question. Yeah. Okay, I'm wanting to find out if there's anybody else who wants to jump into the discussion. We've been really going pretty well here for the evening, and I thank everybody so far who has lent a voice to the questions. But I do want to make sure that the students who are with us, and I'm very happy to see we have a good turnout of students tonight, if any of you have particular questions, because I think most of us who are a little bit longer in the tooth here will admit you're going to have a much longer experience to address these issues, and they need to be addressed. They have to be addressed really pretty quickly, and that means cutting through the politics to get into it. So any questions?
I have a comment in the chat.
Okay, great. Thanks, Stacey.
From Tom. He says, can't see it, don't understand it. Exactly why NASA put so many cameras on Perseverance. And then he follows up with, we understand the need to see or observe to connect people to the issue. If you can't see what is in the ocean, you are not connected.
Okay, interesting comment. I was actually going to kind of come back to that split in priorities between space and the oceans. And, you know, so much of our earlier history with space was highly romanticized, you know, in the 1960s with JFK and so forth. I don't know if there was ever that kind of a signal charge that had that kind of public visibility in terms of the oceans. It's interesting that it's a French film. It's Cousteau, from which we've gotten so much of that lead. And, you know, that may have a political dimension as to why it has not gotten as much traction in this country. Plus, I think, Jason, your point about so much of the ocean we cannot see, that's, and obviously that comment by Tom resonates to that point as well.
So just one quick point. There's only one country that has a bigger exclusive economic zone than the United States, and that's France.
Yeah, yeah.
So they do have a quite a legacy, and some of the and Paul's done much more international work than I.
Yeah.
You will actually see in the governance frameworks of most European countries and international countries a governance structure which recognizes the oceans, sometimes even as a cabinet agency or a framework. We have a much more, and frankly, I probably have this job because Paul spent many years on the U.S. Ocean Commission for Ocean Policy, trying to figure out how to rationalize the very fractured system we have in the U.S. for managing the ocean. So we do have some practical impediments, as Paul indicated. We're trying right now to cut through some of those to get exactly to the point you said, Tom, that we need that statement and commitment from initial pleasure from our very top leaders, because that's the only way all of the diverse players are going to get together. The sense that it is something this is a national mission that we need to commit to, and I think you hit it, you know, on the head by suggesting I'm not aware if anybody else is aware of anything like that we've ever heard from our leaders that I'm aware of.
Right. Okay, any final comments? I think this has been really very successful. I want to, first of all, thank everybody who tuned in this evening for this virtual discussion. Again, I think I'm going to make a promise to you that when we clear the pandemic, one of the first things we'll do at Monmouth University is put this beautiful film on the big screen. That, I think, will be something to behold. And we'll have to find a way to pay all of you who are living outside the state free transportation to come up and enjoy that spectacle with us. I want to, again, thank everybody who attended. I would like you all to join me in a round of applause, which may not be heard by our two discussants, but if you would thank them with me, because really excellent work, Tony and Jason. I think perfect for what we're trying to do with the virtual discussions in this kind of crazy year in terms of doing the World Cinema Series. I also want to mention that on March 11th, Thursday, March 11th, we have the next virtual discussion on the next film, which is the documentary film Honeyland, which many film critics will tell you was the single best film that came out last year, the year that Parasite won the Oscar and so many of the other awards. Honeyland is the story of a Macedonian woman who's a beekeeper, one of the few remaining ones in Europe, and she believes in sustainable beekeeping practices. And she is lonely for neighbors, and in comes a family that wants to make a quick killing from the honey business. And she finds that a lot of her best practices are being tampered with. So it is really a film that is gripping. You might not think beekeeping would capture your attention, but I'd point out that there's some very good films, dramatic films about beekeeping, like Yuli's Gold. So March 11th, Honeyland, and then on April 15th, our last film in the series, Woman at War, about an Icelandic woman who really engages in a bow and arrow campaign against bringing down the power lines of River Moro. So for Honeyland, our two discussants are going to be Pedram Danishkar of the biology department and Mihaela Moskaluk from the English department, they'll bring, I think, two very complimentary and incisive views of the film. And for our final film, I've actually arranged to have three discussants. Nancy Mezzi, Dean of the Honor School, Maya Ferguson, and I'm trying to think of the third one. What's her name? Well, now I have to swear you all to silence that you won't let the third person know that I forgot her name on the spot. But this will be, I think, a good culmination of this year's series.
Excuse me, Tom.
Yep.
It's Catherine Duckett.
Oh, Catherine Duckett. That's right. So I knew in the science area we were well represented. And since that's all about political activism on the environment, I think those three scholars will be really a good mix in terms of fleshing out the issues in that film. But again, thank you for coming out tonight, and everybody travel home safely. Okay, and I'll see you next month at Honeyland.